Hi everyone, and welcome to the GoSkills Excel webinar with Ken Puls. Ken will be answering your Excel-related questions posted on our Facebook page. If you have any questions during the live webinar, please comment below in our Google Hangout page and we'll endeavor to get your questions answered. So without further ado, it's over to you, Ken.
All right, perfect. All right, well, hi everyone, welcome, and for all of those of you that made the last webcast, and I appreciate you coming back. We hopefully will show you some good stuff. One of the things that's kind of interesting that we get to play around with today is that Excel 2016 has just launched as a ready-to-go product here. So I thought, in a way of celebrating that, what we'll do is we'll actually do the demos of what we're looking at with Excel 2016 today. Something that I did want to make very clear about this, though, is that everything that you're going to see was developed in 2013, works in 2013 and 2010, probably even 2007. So, you know, there's nothing that there's a 2016 reliant technology in this particular area here. So what I'm going to try and do, we've looked through all the questions that were on the Facebook page over the last little while, and I tried to pick out the most common themes and the most difficult things that I saw there that we can address in an hour. I'm trying to go through as many of them as I can. If you see something that is, you got a question about one of the related topics that I'm working through as we go, definitely try and fire those in, and I'll see if I can answer them as we go. If it's way outside of what I'm doing, then I may or may not be able to take time to address it, but we'll also do more of these kind of things in future, so we can try and get them then. All right, so one of the first things that I wanted to look at, so a couple of questions related to this, is mail merging. And one of the big questions around this was, you know, how do I send a bunch of emails to people? I've got everything in an Excel spreadsheet. I want to send them out in email. How would I actually go about doing this? I don't really want to copy and paste all these email addresses. So if I go and take a quick look at some of the individual or a piece of data that I might have for this, let's say that I've got a nice little list that looks like this. So it's got customer numbers and names and street addresses and all this kind of jazz, all the individual fields that you think that I might need. We've got some fake email addresses over here, a total balance of what somebody might owe on their account, how much is overdue, and the number of days that this is overdue as well. Now I'd like to take this and I'd like to email somebody a letter to say, hey, your account balance is overdue, come on, you owe me some money, please pay me. So how do we go about doing that? Well, here's how. What we're going to do is I'm going to jump over to Word. And I've got a nice little form letter that I've created for this super widget company. And basically what I'd like to do is I'd like to take that Excel document and I would like to actually go in and replace some of these items with the key pieces that I actually want, like customer name and address and stuff. And I want to send them a letter that's specific to them, but I don't want to have to retype all the stuff manually. That's way too much work. So here's how we go about actually doing that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the Mailings tab in Word. So first thing is I've got my default template set up here. It's just a Word document. It's not a real template, but you know, it's the boilerplate letter. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, let's go select recipients. I could type a new list, but that's way too much work because I've already got it. Or I could use an existing list. And what this means to me is go open my Excel file. So I'll go browse down into the list that I'm going to work with, which is in GoSkills Webcast, and it is Mail Merge Overdue Customers, this Excel document. We'll say OK. You'll notice that it pulls up a list of all the different worksheets in the workbook, and there's only one, it's sheet 1. Even if this were formatted as a proper Excel table, it would still only show you sheet 1. For some reason, the tables don't show up here. But it does ask me, does my first row of data have headers, which I can see by looking back at the Excel data. The first row indeed has headers and everything else is data. So we'll go back to Word and say, yes, OK. And now, the wonders of modern user interface design, very little happens to tell you that you've got it right, but you'll see that some new buttons have lit up on the Mailing tab. We've got address block and greeting lines and inserting merge fields. Now, Excel will actually go through, or Word rather, will go through and it actually tries to match up the fields correctly for the different fields that have been brought in. So if I go to this Match Fields button, you can see that it has a whole bunch of individual fields here and says, okay, with the first name, we matched it to the first name column inside your data set. So that looks good. And last name the same, and company, street address, and whatnot. So all these different things are in here, and they look like they're set correctly. If they weren't, I would have the ability to go back and override this and say, you know, this company is not in this particular field, it's in something else. So I could go back and set that up. Any fields that just don't fit, like overdue, days overdue, it doesn't merge into this particular piece, so that's okay. I'll just say okay to this. And what I'd like to do with this right now is I'd like to go and replace this customer name, address, city, province, postal code. I'm going to delete that. I'm going to put in an address block. And this is based on some sample data, but I'll just say, yep, no problem. That looks okay. Now, it gives me these kind of crazy looking merge fields. Address block around in these quotes, but that's fine for right now, so we won't worry about it. I'll show you how that looks in a little bit here. Then I'm going to take this first name, we'll get rid of that, and I'm going to say, let's insert a specific merge field. I'm going to go with first name. So it puts those around in the quotes. And then I basically go through the letter, replacing the individual piece that I want. What's my total outstanding balance from my merge field list? That will be overdue. Nope, it'll be total balance. And it now tells me that X amount has been outstanding. So we'll just grab that one and say he's the overdue. And it's been outstanding for X number of days. There's the days overdue. So please contact our collection officer and whatnot. Now this looks interesting, but is it helpful? Well, it actually really is, because what we can do right now is I can click Preview Results. And you'll notice that Casey Abbott's information comes in here. Now it does look like I have a bit of a challenge here. I'm probably going to need to go and click on my paragraph and say don't add a space between the paragraphs of the same style and maybe give it another row here. It's just minor formatting stuff. But you can see that now Casey Abbott has moved in here and we've got an accounts receivable balance and a certain amount is overdue. It's been overdue by 79 days. And as I move through, we can see that it actually merges the other information in for different people. One of the challenges we have here, though, is that this is kind of an ugly format the way it looks right now. So in order to fix this, what we need to do is we actually need to modify our merge field. I'm going to show you how this works too. We right-click on it, and we're going to say Edit Field. And at this point, it gives us some merge field codes and whatnot, and that looks a little intimidating. So let's just go cancel out of this one. Let's go back and say, you know what, let's go to toggle field codes. Oh, that looks even less helpful. Well, here's the thing. What we're going to do, and this is what I do when I'm working through this kind of stuff and I'm trying to figure it out, I say, you know, let's go and let's just grab Internet Explorer here, or whichever your favorite search engine is. Obviously, Internet Explorer is not mine. And we're going to go and say, let's go with format merge or word merge fields amount or something. And when you do that, you'll find that Google returns all kinds of results. And this one here looks kind of promising, formatting numbers in a merge field. So we'll just click on that. We try some different articles. As it happens, this one gives us something that looks really, really useful here. It's got that merge field code, which looks similar to what I had, and it says place your cursor before the closing bracket and type something like this. We'll say, okay, cool. So I'm just going to copy that, and I'm going to try and make my merge field look like this. So there's merge field total balance. I'll just go paste that right in there. And now I'll right click and say, let's go toggle field codes. And that doesn't look like it really worked all that well for me, but let's update it. Aha! I've got a spare $sign so I can get rid of this. I can now go right click again and say toggle field codes. We'll go back right before that curly bracket and paste that in again. Because this is putting a $sign in here, I don't need this one over here, so I'll get rid of it. And the secret with merge fields inside merge is once you toggle them back, they don't update necessarily until you right-click and say Update Field. They will update before you print. But the nice piece about this now is that as I move back and forth, you can see that it's actually formatted nicely. So never be afraid to reach out to Google for looking for some of those kind of things. If you've got the term you're looking for, it can be quite helpful. But this is a secret to making your mail merge work. Two more things about mail merge. I can see that I missed a space up here because I put my merge field right in front, so I'll need to fix that too. Two more things about mail merge that we need to know. At this point, what I would generally do is save this document, because this is now a document that's set up and it's ready to go, so that next time I'm opening it, it'll prompt me and say, would you like to remerge the data? And I'm going to say, yeah, that'd be fantastic. Why am I going to do that? Well, because I now only need to maintain the information in this Excel file, and then I can go back and just remerge the merge document or Word document, and it's good to go. I don't have to do all that hard work anymore. The second thing that I tend to do is if I'm sending letters, what I'll do is I'll actually go and say edit individual documents. When you do that, it says, would you like to merge all the records? And I say, yeah, absolutely. And it creates a brand new document that has got all of the individual pieces in there. I like to have this. I'll save this as a PDF or as a Word document. It will never merge again, but at least it gives me a trail of what I actually did. And that's kind of an important thing, especially if you're sending out letters like these ones where you're asking people for money. So we could save this document, we could print it off, and then we could go and put stuff on our envelopes and whatnot. Or if we wanted to email it, what we could do instead is we could go and send email messages. I don't want to do that because I don't want to blast a whole bunch of things out, but we'd follow the process through there, and it would allow us to merge directly into email, so it would send things out. So that's the way that we go through and we do a mail merge in Excel. So hopefully that answers some of the questions there. One big caveat I want to throw out to you: if you're going to go out and you're going to email 1,500 people, you might want to think about whether you want to do that from your own email server, because there are checks and balances that go in place in the email world, and if they see a massive amount of emails all go out from one address, sometimes people can get blacklisted as spammers and whatnot. You don't want that. So if you're going to be doing hundreds of thousands of emails, you might want to actually hire a service to do it. Don't just do it on your own. All right, so let's get rid of this guy here now. So, and I'll kill off my mail merge document or mail merge source because I don't need that one either. Now, the next question that I want to look at and deal with is macros. While we do actually cover this in the basic and advanced course with GoSkills, I saw there was quite a few questions on how to make a macro. So I thought I should probably cover this off and show you a little bit on how this works and some of the individual things we can do. I love macros. I think they're one of the best things in Excel. So let me pull up this example right here. And what you can see is this is an accounting style example. This is what we call a continuity schedule. And basically what the purpose of this particular document is it allows us to keep a list of our vendor names, and it has an opening balance. It adds the additions, it subtracts our usage, and returns an ending balance. So what a typical job is for an accounts clerk at the end of the month is to right-click, copy this information, come right over here, paste it as a value, remove this information here, and then go through the process of saying, okay, let's go and say EO month. This is a formula that we use to add 1 to the end of the month. We'll copy this and we'll paste it as a value back here. Okay, so that'll give us the February 29th, and then we can get rid of this. That's the process that we generally go through every month with this particular file in the accounting world. It's repetitive, it's error prone. I'm just going to back this whole thing up now. And quite frankly, it's kind of a boring job. So wouldn't it be better if we could go through and we could actually automate this process so that we could just click a button and have this work for us? So that's what I'm going to do right now by creating a macro. The first thing that we need in order to create a macro is the Developer tab. This tab exists in Excel 2007 through Excel 2016. If you don't see it there, it's because it's hidden by default. So in Excel 2010 and on, what you can do is you can right-click on any tab and say Customize the ribbon, and you can just check the box next to Developer and say OK. In Excel 2007, it's a little bit different, but you can find the steps on a search engine to do it. It's not that hard. Now, with this up, the Developer tab up, this gives us options to go and record macros. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to click Record Macro. And it says, what would you like your macro's name to be? So I'm going to give it something nice and creative. Now, you can only have one macro with this name in the workbook, okay? Otherwise, it can get a little bit confusing. I could also give it a shortcut key. So if I wanted to, say, press Shift-R, so I now use Control-Shift-R to kick off that macro, I can do that. Be really, really careful when you do this, though. You don't want to put in something like P, because if you override Control-P, then Control-P won't print for you anymore. Okay, it'll run your macro. So you want to be a little bit careful about that. You should always test your shortcut before you assign it to a macro to make sure you're not going to override something really useful. It's actually also a really helpful way to discover new, really useful keyboard shortcuts. So you go, well, I'll just test it, that doesn't do anything. And you go, oh, wow, I never knew it did that. It's kind of a neat thing, too. It asks you, where would you like to store the macro? Is it in this workbook, or would you like it in a new workbook or the personal macro workbook? I've never had the occasion to store a macro in a new workbook, to be honest. The choices generally come down to this workbook, which means it will be saved with this file and travel around with it. That's important if you're going to send the file to someone else and they need the macro to work. The other option is the personal macro workbook, and the way that the personal macro workbook works is that it actually stores it in a workbook that sits on your system that's outside of this one. So if you need the macro to work for multiple files, because they all have the same structure, then you might go this route here. Okay? But for my case, most of the time I say, you know what, let's sort in this workbook because I want that ability to send it to someone else and still have it work. We could put in a description as well, roll the worksheet forward to new month, something like that. And at this point, I can click OK, and it looks like nothing happened. But notice that we've now got a blue square up the top here. This is important because at this point in time, anything you do in the user interface is being recorded. Every mistake you make, every success you have, it doesn't matter. I want to show you something else that's really, really cool here too. I'm going to minimize Excel down just a little bit. We're going to make it a little narrower because I don't need all this space to do all this stuff. I'm also going to click on Visual Basic on the Developer tab. And I'm going to show you that I've got this window here, and I'm going to get rid of some of these little panes on this because I don't need them all. So let me just get rid of that one right there. In here, you can see that I have my workbook name in this Project Explorer. Got modules, and I have a module 1. And this is where all code gets recorded. And as you can see, it's actually started already recording something, and that's kind of interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go and let this slide in behind here, and now I'm going to walk through the process of recording my macro, and I want you to watch what happens over here. So what I said, I'm going to select these cells, and it says, hey, this is range E6 to E10 select. I'm going to right-click and copy them. I'm going to go over here and right-click and paste values. I'm going to select this area of data. You can see how the macro is being built as I go. I'm going to come over to A4 and I'm going to say equals EO month. This is the end of month formula, which will advance the date in A3, comma 1 month forward from where it is, and it will return the ending month date. So it's a neat formula if you don't know it, EO month. We'll say enter. It gives me the date serial number for that. I'm going to copy this, right click and paste it as a value over January, so it now becomes February. Go back to the cell and delete it. You can see everything that's happening here. And at this point in time, I'm finished, so I want to stop my macro. So I come back to the Developer tab, and I'm just going to maximize this so you can see it, but I come back to the Developer tab and I click Stop Recording. At this point, I can go back into that Visual Basic window, clicking here or by going through the other route. And you can see that it's recorded this massive macro for dealing for doing the job that I need it to do. Remember I said I could set it up with Control-Shift-R, so let's just watch this. 1000, 1000, 1500, and if I press Control-Shift-R, oh, it tells me that there's an issue with my macro. That's perfect. That's not supposed to happen, but let's just go through this. Normally, I will admit when I'm doing this, these lines here don't copy, and that's because I resized my window, I believe, so I'm just going to delete those. They're not normally there. And if you're not resizing windows on a regular basis, then that's probably not going to happen to you. So let's try this one more time here. Let's go Control-Shift-R. And you'll notice that it flashes through the macro really quickly, and it copied the ending balance over. So let's go and say that we've used 6,510.83. We're going to clear this one out to 0. Control-Shift-R. You can see that the macro is working. Okay, so it just records everything you do. I'll be honest, as far as going through and learning how to work with VBA, this is the way that I taught myself how to actually code and record stuff. Is I looked at this afterwards and said, okay, is there tricks can I do? Can I change things? What if I don't want to actually use that particular range? Maybe I wanted to actually go from C6 to E10 or something like that. I could just go and make a minor modification in here. As you start to work through VBA and take a VBA class, then what you'll find is that you know that there's actually a lot of information in this particular macro here that can actually be cleaned up. And I'll show you really quickly if we wanted to get into more efficient code. What we would do is we'd actually go through and knock off a bunch of the items that are not required, which would look like, and we can actually make it even more efficient than what I'm doing. I'm just doing this very, very quickly, but a shorter version of the macro that will still work looks like this. And basically all I've done is taken out everything that says select and selection. And you can see that at this point it will still Control-Shift-R flash through and run. It actually doesn't even make as much noise as it did. It didn't flash as much, but if you watch Control-Shift-R, you can see that it's working nicely. One more thing you might want to do with your macro once you've hooked it up is you may want to hook it to a button, because sometimes it's easy to forget that Control-Shift-R actually does this job. So we can go into the Insert button on the Developer tab, and we take this very top left button. This is a button, it's form control. Once we selected it, we left click and drag. The only job of a button like this is to run a macro. That's it. Okay, so we just select the macro we want and say OK. You'll notice it's got the selection handles around it. That means that I can grab this here and say, you know what, let's just replace all this text here with roll forward. Oops. I'll click outside, the little handles will go away, and now when I click the button, you can see that it's quickly going through, flashing through, and doing its thing, rolling that worksheet forward. So this is the basics, and the reason why I show this example is that this example is based on exactly what I did the very first time I recorded a macro. This has been the Kickstarter for me that allowed me to actually go and pursue Visual Basic for Applications, VBA, to write bigger and better macros. One of the big key pieces that I want you to be aware of is before you start making changes in here, you should save your file. Make sure that you know what the state is. Make your changes and then run it to test it and whatnot. There's a huge world in VBA, and it's easy to break things and do things wrong and whatnot. But having said that, there's also a lot of help out on the internet in the shape of forums that will actually allow you to sort of go through and learn about this kind of stuff. And I know there's also been interest expressed about a course as well that we're going to look at too. So that's macros, the real big, the starting point on those. They're really, really powerful. I highly encourage you to learn as much as you can about them. I certainly wouldn't be where I am with Excel if it weren't for that technology. Okay, next up. There was a few questions about setting defaults in Excel. How do I set my default text or default page setup or default fonts and stuff like that? So I'm going to show you right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to put a nice little message in here, and I'm going to go and set a page layout. In this particular case, we'll set the page orientation to landscape, and we'll set the margins to narrow, and let me see here, what else should I do with this kind of thing? Maybe I'll go and, I don't know. You know what, that's probably enough for right now. So what I'd like to do with this right now is I'd like to actually prove that I can save this document so that every time I open it up, it has the correct orientation and the correct margin set up ready to go for me. So I don't have to keep on doing that all the time when I'm actually working with Excel. So the way that I can actually do this is I would like to save this into a very special folder in Excel called the Excel Start folder. So the way we do it is we say, well, that's cool, let's go with Save As. And I'm going to save this thing as, I'm just going to call it My Start. And I'm going to save it on my desktop. Okay. And the reason I'm doing this is because I actually need to save it into this folder. And the folder, the path that you're looking at up the top here, is actually a folder that goes to a Office 365 installation of Office 2016. So if you're working with a locally installed MSI version or EXE version, installed version of Office 2013, this path will be different. You need to actually go and do a quick search to say, where is the Excel Start folder for this version of Excel? And it'll actually take you here. Now, the key in this particular case, and let me just grab the file, it's going to be on my other screen, is what I need to do is I need to move this file that I created into the Excel Start folder. And when I do that, it will probably ask me for, it's actually won't let me do it because the file is open, so let me just go and close that and then try again. And it's going to ask me to elevate the permissions for this because this is a protected folder. It's in the Programs folder. So this is why we can't save directly in there. So we save it to the desktop first and then say Continue, and it'll copy that workbook into this particular folder. And now, when I go and start Excel 2016, you'll notice that right away it opens this workbook. So anything that I do inside here, if I create styles or all those different kind of things that I may want to do, maybe I even set my tab colors and whatnot because I want them to show up that way, or set every cell on a worksheet, and modelers do this. They'll set every cell on the worksheet to pink so that they know that it's not going to go out the door without somebody looking at it. All those things can be set in the file that you're going to store in the Excel Start folder. You can also see that the page layout orientation is in landscape and the margins are set to narrow. So those kind of things are already there. Every time I open Excel, it's going to start me a new file in this particular area, and I'm good to go. So that's one way that you can actually set your defaults. Personally, I don't. I'm going to get rid of this file right now. So in order to do that, I'll close Excel and I'm going to delete this. I usually go with the standard defaults that are there. I have a different method for dealing with some of these things. What I'll do is I'll actually create templates. So if this file is going to be called my template, and it may have some different pieces that I want to deal with, so we'll go with landscape and set my margins as well, narrow. And maybe I even go and say change the sheet tab to a different color as well. Actually, I hardly see that. Let's go with this one and change this one to a really bright yellow. There we go. So we've got these particular pieces that I actually want to have in a worksheet that I want to kick off, but I only want to build this particular workbook in certain instances. That's the difference here. If I need something every single time, I'll save the file and put it in the Excel Start folder. If it's something that I'm going to deal with on a kind of ad hoc basis when needed, this is where we get into the concept of making templates. And the way that we do this is we actually go to the Save As button, or File Save As. I should probably do it through File Save As because you may not have these things on the QAT. So if we go to File Save As, and it says, all right, well, let's go and browse to wherever you want to go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change the File Save As type from Excel Workbook to an Excel template. And I don't need a macro-enabled one. I'm just going to go with the XLTX Excel template here. When I do this, it will change the folder for me to my Office Templates folder. And I'll just go and call this one my GoSkills template. There we go. Now, this document is open, and at the top I can see it's GoSkills.xltx. This is in template editing mode. So if I go File, Close, the template's going to go away. And now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to kick off a new file based on this template. So instead of going to File, Open, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say File, New. And it says, all right, here's a whole bunch of templates that are built into Microsoft Office. You say, well, that's really cool, but I really want my own. Well, you can click on Personal. And here's the GoSkills template that I created. So if I double click on this, notice that something really important happens. Look at the name in the top here. It says GoSkills 1. It does not say GoSkills.xltx. And that's really important because this file has not yet been saved. What this is this is a new file that's been kicked off from the old template. So any changes I make here, if I just go and put some numbers into the middle of this and then say Save, it comes back and says, I'm sorry, you can't save this document because it came from a template. You need to do a Save As, and it'll drive me into the route to go and save it as a new file. So this is how you can create something that you can use over and over and over again. You can even store these on the network. The only killer is that if you want to use a network template, you have to control your network template path by going into Microsoft Word. You can't get at it from Excel, which is really frustrating. But inside Microsoft Word, if we go into the File options, I believe it's under Save, you can actually set your default personal templates location. So this is where yours go. You can also set your default file locations, and you can also somewhere in here find the area, maybe under Advanced, where it'll actually allow you to save your individual templates for your network as well. I'm just trying to remember exactly where this is. I don't have to hunt for this one very often. There we go. Under Advanced, if you scroll all the way down to General and go to File Locations, you can actually set your path for workgroup templates in here, and that means that you can save all your templates on a network drive, and anybody that sets their workload template path will actually go there as well and pull off from the ones that you want to share with your company. Why it's not in Excel, don't ask me, but it's a bit of a shame. Now, so that's great. You can create a new template. You can create multiple new ones off of this, but what happens if you ever need to edit it? Well, that's where we go back and we say, okay, well, let's go File, Open, and then we go back and we actually drill through the file path and we find our template. So in this case, it's on my most recent list. And at that point, it brings it back up in XLTX. This is now in edit mode, so I can hit save. Okay, so we use the Excel start folder if you need to have a default set to use every single time in Excel. We use a template if you want to be able to kick off a file on a regularly repeating basis, but not necessarily every single time. Okay, so different reasons for using them, different feature sets that we may want to go through there. So, all right, so that's good for templates. I'm going to go and just move on to something else here. The next one that I want to look at was actually a question around subtotals. And the question that was actually there was, how do I go about setting up subtotals? And the answer that I've got for you is, well, there's two routes. We could actually go and we could set up a subtotal on our data using Excel's subtotal feature, or we could do it using pivot tables. I will tell you today that I never, ever use the subtotals feature. I think it's kind of a half-baked implementation. It was really good when we didn't have a pivot table to work with, but once we have a pivot table, we can make subtotals and pivot tables, and there's really no reason to go back and just use regular subtotals on our data. So I'll show you very quickly how subtotals work. The big key when you're working with subtotals is, if I want to subtotal all of the sales of inventory items here, I need to sort my data first. That's really important. So I'll click somewhere in my data here. I'll click this, and we'll say, let's go and sort by inventory item, ascending. So now I've got all my adorable kitty cats all together here. At this point in time, I could now go and insert subtotals, and I need to try and figure out where that command is actually, because as I say, I never use it. Oh, here we go, over on the side. We can say subtotal, and we can choose to say, you know, at every change in inventory item, I'd like to go through and add a subtotal to the cost, and well, maybe not the cost, yeah, sure, why not, the cost and the price. And instead of using, I know, let's do this better. Let's go back to sold by, and we'll figure out a count. So this will put a nice little summary on it. It adds some grouping levels, so we can see that we sold 24 adorable kitty cats, we sold 29 cranky crocodiles and whatnot. The reason why I don't use this particular feature is because it's very limited. It's also kind of easy if somebody goes in here now and starts making more subtotals, they can mess things up pretty quick, and I don't see the need for this. So I'm going to go back into subtotal, and I'm going to choose remove all. Get my data back into the state that it was before. What I'd like to do at this point is I'd like to actually do something a little bit better here. I'm going to go back, I'm going to resort the data, but I'm going to sort it by date, because I think this is really important, is that our data does not need to be sorted in any way, shape, or form in order to use the tool that I'm going to be dealing with. So we don't have to worry about that at all. Now, if you've never used pivot tables before, you'll find this is just a really cool looking little tool here, and it's actually very easy to use. The first thing I'm going to do, and you should do with all of your data when you're going to use a pivot table, is you should turn it into a table. And that's super, super easy. We just click somewhere inside the data, we go to the Home tab, and we say Format as Table, and we take a look and try and find a color scheme that we think really works for us. So let's go with yellow today. And it has headers and whatnot, so that's fine. So we'll say OK, and it creates a nice table here of all of our data. It gives us this alternate row banding and whatnot. So that's a real nice benefit of tables right off the bat. It's super hard to do without a table. So we can click outside, and you'll notice that when I do that, my ribbon comes back to normal here. If I click inside, I get my Table Tools tab. It has a name for a table as well. This is the second thing that I always recommend you do. When you turn your data into a table, number one, turn it into a table. Number two, when you do, give your table a proper name like sales. The reason why, I click outside here, my table has a name. This little box here is the name box, which means that I can click on that and I can jump back to it at any point in time, and it will select all of the data in the table for anywhere. So if we scroll down here, let's go all the way to the end, we can see that we have up to row 323, and it's selected every single one of those rows, which is great. Now, At this point, what I'd like to do is I'd like to go through and I'd like to actually create a pivot table off of this data. And again, you're going to see this is super easy. You don't have to turn it into a table first, it's just highly advisable. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm clicking somewhere inside my table. I'm going to say Insert, Pivot Table. And it says, hey, I've noticed you're in the sales table. Do you want to work with that? We say, yeah, absolutely. So where would you like to put it? You know what? I can go anywhere I like, a new worksheet, an existing worksheet. I'll just go new worksheet for right now and say OK. And it creates this nice pivot table frame. And you'll notice on the right-hand side that I've got a pivot table field list here, and it has a whole bunch of fields in it. These names happen to be the column headers for my table. Okay. Actually, if you didn't notice, if you didn't notice too, this is kind of cool. When I'm in my table and I scroll down, look at my column headers of A, B, C, D. The table headers snap in place of A, B, C, D all the way across. So now, even though I'm 323 rows down, I never lose the context of what I'm in. That's another benefit of tables. There's many, but that's one of them. So that's kind of neat. Anyway, those table headers come across to the pivot table. So now I can look at this and I can say, okay, what I really wanted to know was how many animals of each type did I sell? Well, let's grab inventory item and drop it into the rows area. And it creates a unique list of every one of the items that I had in my 320 some odd items. And then I say, well, that's kind of cool. I would like to get a count on how many I sold. So let's go and drag the inventory item into the values area. So same field into the values area, and it comes back and says, well, here's the count. You sold 24 adorable kitty cats, 29 cranky crocodiles, a total of 322 different animals that we actually went through. Say, well, that's kind of neat. So this is cool because now we can start actually playing around with this. You say, well, that's great, Ken, but that's hardly a subtotal, is it? Well, that's true, but let's drag sold by down underneath our inventory item. You can see that Adorable Kitty Cat was sold by Fred, Jane, John, and Mary. Now, personally, I don't like where these subtotals are actually showing up. I prefer my subtotals underneath. So I'm going to go to the Pivot Table Tools tab, and on the Design tab, I'm going to say Subtotals, Show at Bottom. There we go. So now we've got our subtotals down below. And the beautiful thing about pivot tables is when I look at that and go, boy, that's great and everything, but I'd really rather see a subtotal of how many were sold by Fred and then by Jane. Well, I can just move this around. So I'll just drag sold by above inventory. And now I can see all the sales that Fred had. And you know what? If I really like this, but I actually want both views, right click, move or copy. Let's create a new copy of this worksheet. It still has the pivot table on it, but now I'll move sold by back down below inventory. So I've now got this nice view. I've now got this nice view over here. And if I want to create another pivot table off it that shows the data in a different way, well, no problem. I'll just come back over here and say Insert, Pivot Table. And let's go and put this on an existing worksheet. We'll go put this over beside one of the other pivot tables. Why not? And OK. So let's see what our sales were by day. Ooh. Okay, actually, let's see. How many days do we have in here? Oh, it looks like it's all May. All right, no problem. So we can see with this particular case, let's put sold by across the columns, and let's put the price across the top here as well. So I can start to get some really interesting insights out of my data using pivot tables. So rather than build a subtotal just using the plain old subtotals feature, I'll pull it into a pivot table because at that point, I've got more flexibility and more freedom to play around with it. I'm not really stuck with doing just one level of pivot tables either. If I wanted to actually even further expand this and say, well, this is great, but I'd really like to see, for example, how about by day? I can drag this down below, and now I can see, again, more subtotals. Adorable Kitty Cat's been subtotaled for what Fred's sales were. Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, we can see the individual ones. So Fred has a subtotal. Adorable Kitty Cat has a subtotal, Cranky Crocodile has a subtotal, so we can play around with those things and you get a lot more flexibility. It's a little harder to do when you're working with the subtotals feature. One thing I want to point out on this, if you haven't seen this yet, if you've taken the Excel Basic and Advanced course, GoSkills has an entire pivot table course that we just released about a month and a half ago, and it is a deep dive into pivot tables because these are phenomenally amazing tools. We're not limited to counting. We can do all kinds of different math in our pivot tables. We can make them show in all kinds of different ways. This is probably one of the most versatile, the most powerful tools that actually that sits inside Excel. It is the fastest way to summarize data that you can possibly believe, but there are some tricks that you need to know in order to work with it. I highly recommend if you work with any amount of data that you explore that course, because it's going to give you a very, very good good overview into what's actually there. Now, there's a question in here about pivot tables that just came into the question queue about working with grand totals. How do we show the grand total on the top of the pivot table? That's a good question. Let me see if I can actually make that happen as well. I can see the grand totals off and on. I can put the subtotals to the top. That's a good one. I think, as a matter of fact, that the subtotals to top would work, but I don't think you can actually fire your grand totals to the top of the pivot table itself. And I'm just going to right-click and collapse all these so that we can actually see what we're looking with. If it was absolutely imperative for me that my grand total were at the top, I'm going to say I don't believe that we can move the grand total to the top on this one. The way that I would do this is I would probably fake this by actually copying this pivot table. Actually, let me just go and insert some new rows in this. Insert here, because you can't overlap a pivot table. So what I'll do is I'll just copy this particular pivot table. I'll go and place it on the top here. And what I would do with this guy at this point in time is I would probably pull off the things like sold by. Whoops, yeah, it's not gonna let me do that. Hold on one second here. So I'm going to go back to this pivot table. I'll pull off the sold by. I'll pull off the inventory. I'll pull off the day. So I'm just looking at my count of inventory item. And what I would probably do with this now is just move this guy across over here. And I would move my pivot table over one more, and I would hide the row on here, and I would just come up with a way to actually go and fake this out if I desperately needed it to do that. The other thing that I would actually try and do is I go and do a quick Google search on it to try and find out whether or not anybody's actually been successful with it. I should probably also mention at this point in time that I don't know everything about Excel. Far from it. This program is so absolutely massively vast. I know a lot, but not everything. So Google's your friend with those particular cases, but my understanding from looking at it is the grand total can't be populated directly to the top, but certainly the subtotals absolutely can. And is it possible to indicate the grand total? I'm not totally clear on the last one. If we're filtering top 10, the grand total will be the total of the top 10. Is it possible to indicate the grand total as well? I'm not 100% sure on what that one means, but if you want to fire that question into me a little bit more detail, I will try and take that offline and answer that for you as well. But in the meantime, as I say, a lot of the stuff that you can do with pivot tables is covered in the GoSkills course. Highly recommended. It'd be a great investment of time. One of the things that Microsoft will tell you is that when they actually talk to a user, one of the big questions they ask is, do you work with pivot tables? And if you do, then you're immediately classified as an advanced user right off the bat. There's not a lot of people that really do, but they're an incredibly powerful tool. So something to be aware of. I'm going to move on to another example here, and this one again there was quite a few questions on conditional formatting. Things like I've got dates and columns that need to alert me when an expiry date is approaching. So I thought that I'd look through this, and the tool that I would use to go about dealing with this is I would use conditional formatting. So the way that I would look at this is I say, well, you know, if the date for renewal here is September 22nd, what I'd like to do is I'd like to be able to look at the data that's in this table, and I'd like to color anything that needs to be renewed as of today's date in let's say green, so that I can see that it needs to be done. Anything that's overdue, maybe I want to highlight in red. So the way that we can do this is, and this is a big key, is always when you're building a conditional formatting rule, I always take my data and I start in the top left-hand corner, because all the formulas I build are going to be relative from whichever cell has the lightest color background, the white one, the active cell. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to the Home tab and Conditional Formatting. And I'm going to create a new rule. This gets a little bit crazy because we're actually going and building a custom rule using a formula in order to figure out whether or not something should be highlighted or not. The way we do this is that whatever we evaluate needs to evaluate to true or false. If it's true, the formatting will be applied. If it's false, it won't. So the key that I need to look at now is I need to say, well, from the perspective of this particular cell, from A6 here, what do I need to trigger if I want to actually say, if it's the same as the date over here, turn it green? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, if this cell, A6, equals this cell, which has B2, then at that point, if that's true, then I want it to actually turn those particular cells green. But there's the problem. This is relative. So as I move down this table, I want to be able to look at cell A7. So I can't really have this be absolute. So I need to knock off this $sign in front of the 6. But as I move across, I also want it to look and make sure that it's always looking at the date. So we've got to understand our absolute and relative references here. But I always want to make sure that I'm comparing against this particular cell. So in this case, if I look down, I come all the way down here to A10, it would look at this cell and say, is A10 equal to B2? And in this case it is, so this cell should trigger the rule. In this particular cell, again, stepping one across, because the column has a $sign in front, it's going to stay, so it would be looking at A10 again. So that's going to be good. So we're going to say, okay, let's format this rule. What would we like to actually have happen? Well, I'm going to change the fill to green, and maybe I'll change the font to something like white. Now, the preview box here is unfortunately only of limited use. I really wish that when you change the fill color here, that format would come through so you can see that it would be a white fill or white font on green, but unfortunately it doesn't. But let's try it. We'll say okay. That's a better preview. We'll say okay. You'll notice that now this works. And here's what also gets interesting. As I change this, let's say that today's date was September 15th. It'll highlight a different day for me. So this is now live to the data that I'm working with. So that's kind of cool. Well, now what if I said, well, what about the ones that have actually expired? Well, no problem. We can go back. We can say conditional formatting, new rule. We'll go and use a rule again, and we'll say, you know, in this case here, what I'd like to say is B2 greater than, is that going to work for me? Greater than, yeah, let's go greater than A6. And I just need to, again, make this one relative. If this is true, let's go format it and say fill. We'll use a dark red with a white font. And let's see what ends up happening here. There we go. So it actually works nicely for me again. And if I were to go back and say, you know, let's say that today's date is September 15th, you can see that it actually allows me to make some changes. So so that's kind of cool, because you know we can now make these kind of things, you know, dynamic to the data set that we need. As our data changes, as we update our table and we see what's going on there, things will work nicely. As you get a bigger and better command of formulas, if we had another thing over here that said renewed yes or no, we could then add an and clause to it inside the conditional format. So let's say renewed, and if this is yes, we'll make most of these guys here yes. This one will be a no, and these guys here will be no. We could go back and we could modify our original rule, go into conditional formatting, manage rules, and we could say, you know what, I only want to highlight this one when it's red if, we'll say, and B2 is greater than A6, comma, $E, oops, that's not a $sign, $E6 equals no. In this case, when we modify that formula, it should now, when we apply the rule, only highlight the ones that are still outstanding. So this is kind of a neat little trick that you can use to play around with your data as well. Now, conditional formatting is not limited to just working with these particular pieces either. Conditional formatting can be used to set up some other rules as well. One of the ones that's really kind of neat is that we could actually set up a rule to go with our differences over here to show whether or not they're positive or negative. We can use conditional formatting in that way to say, you know, let's look at icon sets and let's go and say, you know what, how about this guy right here? So if it's positive, it'll give us a green check mark. If it's negative, it gives us a red X. And you can see that those rules actually line on top of the colors that we actually have for other rules as well. And if it's nothing, well, we probably don't really need an icon at all. But that's not really what we have here. So let's go see if we can modify it. So the key to modifying your conditional formatting rules is if I go back to conditional formatting and say manage, you'll see that there's no rules here at all. Well, that's not good. And the reason being is because I haven't selected a cell that has one of those rules on it. So conditional formatting, I've selected a different cell now and manage rules, and it says you have 3 rules in place here. Even though these ones are not actually showing because they didn't trigger them as true, you can see that my red and green rules exist. Now, if I want to modify my icon set rule, I can click Edit Rule. You'll notice that by default, when you set up a rule like this, it actually deals with everything in percentages. I'm saying, well, that's not ideal. I really need this to look at a specific number. And I need this one to look at a specific number because my goal here is to show a green check mark if the variance is positive because the performance is up versus prior, and I want a red X if it's lower. So let's just make this one greater than or equal to 0 will give us this. Greater than 0 will give us the number. So if it's equal to 0, it should return this. But you know what? I don't want an icon at all, so I can customize that set too. Then we can say OK and apply. And you'll notice now that anything that has a negative number gets a red X. Anything that's positive has a green check mark. Anything that's 0 has nothing at all. So we can sort of, manipulate things and make them go the way that we want here. All right. So next question, I got a couple of questions about keyboard shortcuts that came through here, and I think I'll deal with those as well. Where do we find all the keyboard shortcuts for Excel? Because there's a ton of keyboard shortcuts, and how do you know what they are? Well, in this particular case here, what we'll do is we'll go and we'll take a quick look at the options for these. Again, we can reach out to Google and we can say, you know what, show me Excel keyboard shortcuts. And let's see what we get here. We can look down a few of them here. This one's interesting. This one's actually a support.office.com, which means that it comes from Microsoft Office. And we can also see, well, here's the next one. This one doesn't look like it's version specific. So why don't we try that? So we're not always the first link that we're actually looking for. And it comes back and it says, hey, look at this. There are all kinds of Excel keyboard shortcuts. And if we actually look at this one, it gives us, oh, wow, this one's actually pretty good because this one looks like it's giving us Mac keyboard shortcuts, which is kind of interesting. If we see that we actually have different ones here, like function shift or shift F3 for Mac stuff that's maybe not PC specific, then at that point we would actually go back and say, well, let's go back one more and let's take a look at this other one. And the one big secret I'll give you is that really keyboard shortcuts honestly haven't changed that much in a long time. Most of them just still work. So in this case here, even though this says 2010, these keyboard shortcuts will all work for 2010 and 2013. It also gives you a little bit of an idea as to what happens with the Excel accelerator interface as well. And I'll show you how that works. Is if I press the Alt key, you'll notice that we get a whole bunch of little numbers and letters that show up. So if I wanted to go into, say, the Data tab, I could press A. And on here now, it shows me a whole bunch of other individual pieces as well that I could end up dealing with too. So I've got a keyboard shortcut root that's actually localized to the version of Excel that I actually want to work with. So that's kind of interesting because I could do some neat things like, let me just see here, I'm going to set up a really quickly, a quick set of data here, and we'll say equals EO month, and we'll go with this one, comma 1. I'm going to show you a new feature from Excel 2016 here as well. So we'll just make sure that we've got some dates. That looks good, and we'll put some values in here, and I'm just going to go bang some random numbers into this. And what I'd like to do right now is I'd like to create a forecast sheet. This is something new in Excel 2016. So I'll go to Alt, and that's on the Data tab, so I'll press A. And then over here I can see forecast sheet has got two letters, FC, at which point it'll actually allow me to go and create a new forecast to forecast out with some kind of confidence what this trend might look like, which is a little bit weird, obviously, because it's random data. But if I created that, it can actually go and create a new chart for me. And I did almost all of that through the keyboard commands. Okay, so the Alt key will bring up that particular menu. And if you get somewhere where you don't want to be, let's say I go into the Formulas tab and I say, geez, that's not where I want it to be, pressing Escape will take me back up one level, and Escape, again, will get me out of it. So you can keyboard anything inside Excel there. In addition, we can also go back and we can look at all of the individual keys that we have here as well. So remember, there is a way to get to those Mac keyboard shortcuts too if you're using a Mac, which is interesting because honestly I didn't find that the first time I went through this. I came up with the keyboard one, so it depends on what terms you're using. But there's a huge long list of all the keyboard shortcuts here. You know, it's one of those things that you try and pick one off a day and see what actually happens. But you can see with all, you know, F11, Alt F11 will open the Visual Basic Editor. Shift F11 will give you a new worksheet, or F11 will give you a chart of the data that you're actually selected there. So depending on what alternate keys you use, you might have different effects as well. One question that I did see that I can answer for you right off the top of my head, somebody posted in and said they had a Windows 8.1 Pro and the function keys don't work in Excel. Any ideas on how to solve this problem? Absolutely. Hold down function and caps lock. As soon as you do that, it actually acts as function lock, and it will switch the top of your keyboard to using the Excel F keys instead of using the function keys. So I know this is a pretty big issue for somebody who uses a Microsoft Surface, my Surface Pro, all the way across the top. That's what I had to do. Function caps lock, that will turn it in so that now it actually returns F2 so I can go into edit mode in Excel. So that's a quick tip there for you as well. I see a question in the queue here as well that says, I've used VLOOKUPs before, but I've heard of HLOOKUPs. How do they work and what's the advantage? That's a really interesting question. The first time I ever wrote a lookup function, it was an HLOOKUP function. Basically, what an HLOOKUP does is it works exactly like a VLOOKUP, except it works horizontally. That's what the H stands for in HLOOKUP. VLOOKUP looks vertically. So with VLOOKUP, you look in the first column and try and return a value from the offsetting column. In HLOOKUP, you look in the first row and try and return a value from an offsetting row. Is there any advantages? You know what? The last time I used an HLOOKUP was years ago, because the reason is the majority of the data that I actually get, or the way that I transform my data, I actually set it up into a situation that will allow a VLOOKUP over an HLOOKUP. Related to that, I also saw a question in there that says, you know, I've got a file with over 100,000 rows of data, which is better to use, VLOOKUP or index match? Index match is kind of the crazy, more powerful version of VLOOKUP. It's also the faster version. If you try and fill 100,000 rows of data and you put a VLOOKUP down every single one of them, your workbook is going to slow down immensely. If you use an index match, it's going to go much, much quicker. So if you're familiar with index match functions, by all means, I would try and use those over VLOOKUP. They're definitely more powerful. They just kind of end up taking a little bit more to sort of wrap your head around, because instead of VLOOKUP, where you're saying look up this one piece of data in this table and give me this column back, you basically have to say, where's the table? And then you need to use a match function to say which row out of this table should I return and which column out of this table should I return. So you have to find both of those points to return your intersection. It's not hard once you understand how to do it, but the challenge is for people that are just getting used to VLOOKUP, index match is a little bit more complicated and can lead to a little bit more in the way of headaches. So certainly, if you're going to be doing a lot of lookup stuff, I would definitely try and lean towards index match, but just be aware that at the end of the day, the functionality that you create, if you're lucky, you get promoted and somebody else has to maintain it. So you don't want to make it too difficult on them either. And if a VLOOKUP is more complicated than most of the people in your team are dealing with, you may want to also take that into account. Um, Let me see. One other question I've got here, and so probably the last one I go through is, I've got a lot of experience here working with VLOOKUP and pivot tables. I'm using a Mac. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles that my Excel has, and that's because I think the videos that we were demoing when were Excel 2010 or 2013. What's the best way to practice using those two features? This is a killer, and I hate to say this, but the reality is that the Mac version is significantly behind Excel. For Windows. When you look at Excel or Mac 2016, Mac Excel 2016, even that is still significantly behind in a lot of ways Excel 2013. It's starting to catch up slowly, but there were some massive changes that ended up happening in Excel 2013 and or 2010 and 2013 around tools like Power Pivot and Power Query. The reality is that we've got pivot tables. Most of the basic functionality is there, certainly in Mac Excel 2016, but there definitely are some differences. If you need to be able to practice those skills, there is a way to get Windows Excel on a Mac machine. It involves buying something called either VMware Fusion or Parallels, and then you can install a Windows virtual machine and run the Windows version of Excel on your Mac. I know a great many people that actually do this because they need the more powerful tool set of Excel. It's one of those things that you look at and you go, yeah, but then I got to run Windows. Yeah, well, I know that's part of the deal, but the reality is that Microsoft is a Windows shop primarily. They're trying to work on these Mac platforms. They're trying to get it up to full parity, but it's going to take some time. And the reality is that the pace of change that's marching forward on the Windows side right now is staggering how fast it's going. The reality is Mac's going to take a long time to catch up on this, so just something to sort of be aware of. I think we've gone through all the questions that I had picked off the Facebook page. I think we've answered the majority of the ones that have come into to the chat window as well, and I see that we're shortly after the window that we had here. So I think at this point in time, if I don't see another question come in the next couple of seconds here, basically, I just want to say thanks. Thanks for coming. I hope that you guys found this useful and enjoyed it. Certainly, leave us your feedback. We want to know what people are looking for and what they're using, so that we can build courses that really target what you need to know. So, yeah, thanks for having us here, and I think we're probably good.
Thanks, Ken. Thank you so much for this webinar. It was highly informative, and thank you for all the viewers for joining and for your questions. We'll also post a link to this webinar so that you can watch it at a later date. Thank you.